The Fallout franchise has a long and complex history and timeline that has been expanding its post-apocalyptic future ever since the original games released back in 1997. With 4 mainline games, a handful of spin-offs, and now a TV show that's set within the same universe, the series has a big timeline, and I'm here to explain it all for you. We start our journey on October 23rd, 2077, the day when the bombs fell. With the resource war reaching a fever pitch, the superpowers of the world started launching nukes at each other, and in the space of 2 short hours, pretty much destroyed the world. Naturally, the vast majority of the planet's population straight up died, but the aftermath of the fallout brought just as much devastation, as a never-ending storm of black rain lashed the nuclear wastelands and poisoned the world with high levels of radiation, which in turn killed scores of old species and created a few new ones to replace them. Before you even got time to finish your morning coffee, a Vault-Tec representative turns up at your door and asks you, the player's character, aka the sole survivor, a few personal questions about your future. Good thing too, as a few short minutes later, the first nuke started to fall on the US, and you, your spouse, and your infant son, Sean, are whisked into Vault 111. And just in the nick of time as well, as a nuclear blast eviscerates the horizon as you descend into the underground vault. The sole survivor and his family don the iconic blue and yellow vault suits and settle in for a long, peaceful sleep in a cryogenic chamber. Which brings us to Fallout 76, where the first vault to open is Vault 76, which opened 25 years after the Great War on Reclamation Day, 2102. Situated in the Appalachians of West Virginia, Vault 76 is home to the best and brightest minds that USA has to offer. Tasked with re-uploading the wastelands of West Virginia, the clever little citizens of Vault 76 head on out into, well, a bit of a lifeless, lonely world. At least that was the case when the multiplayer game originally launched. You see, non-player characters or NPCs didn't start populating the game until the Wastelanders DLC launched. The player character is given a secret mission by the Vault Overseer, a mission to secure a metric ton of nuclear weaponry, only there's a bit of a problem in the Appalachians. In the 25 years or so since the nuclear devastation, a plague of beasts known as the Scorched has taken control of the lands. Mind controlled by some giant queen bee-like Scorched beasts, the Scorched presents quite the obstacle to repopulating the wastelands, and so the bulk of Fallout 76's narrative sees the player tracking down the way to destroy the Scorched, and the answer, as we all know, is to nuke them. En route to this endgame, the player eventually discovers that Scorched might actually have been created in a lab, but despite this revelation, the plan is still to nuke the crap out of every single one of them. After they kill the Scorched Beast Queen, the connection to the rest of the Scorched breaks, and the citizens of Vault 76 can finally start working on resettling the area. With the third of the Scorch extinguished, players start to return to the area in dribs and drabs. 2 major factions begin to emerge out of the rabble, the Settlers and the Raiders. Rumors of a vast treasure lead to the player discovering the existence of Vault 79, which basically houses the entire gold reserves of the US in one tiny living space. The player chooses their allegiance to either the Settlers or the Raiders and heads off to raid Vault 79. And depending on your decision making, you can choose to spread the wealth in a number of ways, which will just break the delicate balance of power in the area between the 2 factions. As an ever-expanding multiplayer game, the story is constantly evolving in Fallout 76. But there's a few key beats still to mention. First is the introduction of a Fallout franchise staple, the Brotherhood of Steel. This highly militaristic faction is a post-war creation, built up out of the remnants of the US Army with the core goal of securing and preserving technology, advanced pre-war weaponry, and kit. They're often seen as sporting the big hulking tank-like power armor. They set up their base in operations in West Virginia in the old Atlas Observatory, which they renamed Fort Atlas, as they presumably got more of an army vibe to it. As a player, you can ally yourself with the Brotherhood in a bid to help the Wastelanders of the Appalachians safe, or help the Brotherhood of Steel double down on their mission to secure war weaponry. And lastly, for Fallout 76, are the Expeditions, which takes the player away from West Virginia to visit the ruins of Pittsburgh, affectionately known as the Pit and Atlantic City. Which brings us to Fallout the original. From the wastelands of West Virginia, we travel to the remnants of California in the year 2161 for the events of the very first Fallout game. Here we witness the story of Vault Dweller, a citizen of the ill-fated Vault 13, which has got a problem, a big one. An all-important microchip that controls their water processing unit has given up the ghost, and it's Vault Dweller's job to venture out into the wasteland to locate a new one. This mission takes him to the ruins of the nearby Vault 15, and then onwards to Vault 12, which is located underneath the city known as Necropolis. And it's here underneath the city of the Walking Dead that the Vault Dweller finds a replacement chip to solve Vault 13's water problem. One of the first major settlements that the Vault Dweller visits is a little place by the name of Shady Sands, which becomes one of the most important townships in the whole series. For now, it's a humble little place that managed to establish itself on a thriving community. We'll catch up with this place a few more times, but let's just say in the future it's not looking so bright. There's a lurking threat in the wastelands of California, a contingent of mutants that have proliferated throughout the world known as super mutants. The Vault Dweller chases these reports back to a quasi-religious movement called the Children of the Cathedral, which is headed up by a super mutant called the Master. Long story short, the Vault Dweller is tasked by the Overseer of Vault 13 with eradicating the super mutants, which leads him to encounter a conspiracy within the cathedral. It turns out that the Master is capturing humans and turning them into super mutants using something known as Forced Evolutionary Virus, or FEV, which is contained with a series of vats that glow with an unhealthy green glow, which just screams danger. As Fallout is a classic RPG, you can complete this mission in a handful of different ways, with the ultimate end goal of destroying the vats of green goop and neutralizing the super mutant threat. And for all the Vault Dwellers' effort, you think they'd be cheered back into Vault 13 as a hero, right? Wrong. The Overseer ultimately denies the Vault Dwellers entry back into the home because he's worried that your actions will inspire future generations to leave the Vault and undermine all the hard work of keeping it going strong. And so Fallout comes to an end with the Vault Dweller exiled back into the Wastelands. We are back to the West Coast in the year 2241 for the events of Fallout 2. Here, we learn about what became of the Vault Dweller after he was exiled in the first game. He eventually settles in a village called Arroyo, where he has a family, and 80 odd years down the line we catch up with one of his descendants, who goes by the grandiose name of the Chosen One. Much like their ancestor, the Chosen One is tasked with saving their community, in this case Arroyo, which is suffering from the effects of a devastating drought. And so the Chosen One is sent out into the world to find something that is known as the Garden of Eden kit, a terraforming kit that is capable of creating life out of nothing. The Chosen One ventures out in search of the Gek and eventually comes across the remains of Vault 13, which has become infested with Deathclaws, vicious dinosaur-like beasts. Upon returning home to report their findings, the Chosen One discovers that Arroyo has been taken over by an organization called the Enclave, which is basically made up of what's left of the US government, sitting on a cache of sophisticated technology and weaponry. The Enclave basically tries to rule the US with an iron fist, so naturally, they need to be taken down a peg or two. And so it becomes the Chosen One's core mission: take down the Enclave and save the poor citizens of Arroyo. They set about this by charting a course on a giant freight ship in the Enclave's base of operations, an offshore oil rig where they discover that both residents of Arroyo and Vault 13 are being held captive. To make matters worse, the Enclave has evolved the nasty FEV from the original game into an airborne virus, which helps make them maintain their control over the local populations. The Chosen One naturally throws a spanner into the works though, saves the Arroyo and Vault 13 hostages, and kills the head of the Enclave, who's also the president of the US to boot. With this happy ending, the combined forces of Vault 13 and Arroyo create a prosperous community together in the aid of a newly found Gek. Just don't mention those devastating Deathclaws. Naturally, the peace doesn't last. The crap hits the fan in Vault 101 as the Lone Wanderer turns 19 in the year 2077, which kickstarts the main plot of Fallout 3. Things go sideways for the Wanderer when they are awoken to told that their father has left the Vault, something that has never happened before in Vault 101. Although it proved to be a lie, with the Overseeing and his men going a little crazy in the circumstances, the Lone Wanderer is forced to flee for their safety into the surrounding capital wasteland, the irradiated remains of the land surrounding Washington, D.C. It's a real out of the frying pan and into the fire moment for a young hero, and so the Lone Wanderer ventures out into the capital wasteland in search of their father, a quest that makes up the bulk of Fallout 3's story. On their travels through the wasteland, the Wanderer travels to a variety of different settlements, chief among them in the town of Megaton, named for an unexploded nuclear bomb buried in the foundations of the city, the remnants of Washington, D.C., which houses the Galaxy News radio station and its DJ, Three Dog, and a giant battleship that has been renamed Rivet City. While chatting with Colin Moriarty, one of the denizens of Megaton, the Lone Wanderer discovers a great deal more about their parents' history, namely that they weren't actually born in Vault 101. This was actually a double shock, as we also discovered that 101 was designed to never be opened as part of those sinister social experiments. As they continue to explore the wasteland, the Wanderer eventually meets a scientist called Dr. Madison Lee, who worked alongside their father. While chatting to Dr. Lee, we learn that James, the Wanderer's father, was once involved in something known as Project Purity, but had taken refuge in Vault 101 in the wake of his partner's death during childbirth. On top of all these meaty revelations, the Lone Wanderer gets embroiled in the power struggle between the two heavyweight factions in the wasteland, the corrupt bureaucratic bastards and the Enclave-led president Henry Eden, who is actually an AI, and a splinter group of the Brotherhood of Steel led by charismatic Elder Owen. At the center of these two warring factions is the aforementioned Project Purity, a giant water processing plant that helps feed clean water supply to the wider DC area. While you can ally yourself with either faction, along with a whole host of other oddballs and eccentrics across the capital's wasteland, you're largely pushed towards joining the Brotherhood after you learn that the Lone Wanderer's father worked with them in the past. All of this eventually leads to the Lone Wanderer ending up taking their father's mission, by seeking out a Gek in order to reignite Project Purity. Amidst helping out the project, the Wanderer actually tracks down their father to Vault 112, where they had to free him in some bizarre virtual reality nightmare. With James and the Wanderer reunited, they team up with the good Dr. Lee to resume work on the gestating project. The Enclave had different ideas as the ambush led to Henry Eden's right-hand man, Colonel Autumn Augustus, resulting in James' death when he sacrifices himself to keep the project out of the bureaucrats' hands. The Wanderer eventually hunts down a Gekken Vault 87 with the aid of the Brotherhood of Steel and a top super mutant called Fog, but it's all for nothing as they are captured by the Enclave when they leave the vault. This leads us towards the bombastic conclusion of Fallout 3. After they break free from the shackles of the Enclave, joining them in this daring attack is the Brotherhood's poster boy, a big iron giant by the name of Liberty Prime. Remember, nothing hits harder than democracy, and a giant killer robot. This all led to a final confrontation with Colonel Augustus, who you can either kill or convince to go away. With the Colonel out of the way, the route is cleared to save Project Purity or not. The fate of the Wasteland is in your hands, and you can do whatever you please, as the control center for the project is in the middle of a highly irradiated area. Turning it on will kill whoever does so, which leads to yet more life or death decision making. Fallout New Vegas is the next up on the timeline, taking us back to the west of the Mojave Desert in the glowing city of New Vegas, the post-apocalyptic overhaul of the City of Sin. The year is 2281, and unlike the irradiated wastelands we've already visited, New Vegas is a thriving city complete with running water and electricity courtesy of a nearby Hoover Dam. And all of this is because of our good old mate, Mr. Robert House. The same pre-war Robert House who found Robco over 200 years ago. He's still knocking about as a result of his defense system shooting down most of the nukes heading for Vegas, and the judicious use of a status chamber located in his base of operations in the Lucky 38 casino. And it's from here that he's poured his extensive resources into keeping New Vegas alive and kicking. But his dominion over the city is under threat from a whole host of different factions, all vying for control of New Vegas. For starters, there are our old friends, the New California Republic, who have expanded their base in Shady Sands to build an empire across the west. The NCR is looking to expand into the Mojave and annex the current independent New Vegas. However, their resources are divided, and with much of their attention being put toward combating Caesar's Legion, the antithesis of the NCR and the extremist faction have styled itself on the ancient Roman Empire. Their end goal is to basically wipe out the NCR and enact a military dictatorship over the city of New Vegas. And with both of those major factions vying for power, their primary target becomes the Hoover Dam, which basically controls New Vegas. And while the game takes place in 2281, Caesar's Legion makes an unsuccessful attempt on taking control of the Hoover Dam in 2271, a conflict that went down in the history books as the first battle of the Hoover Dam. Into this chaotic mix falls the Courier, the main protagonist of Fallout New Vegas, who starts off the game with a bullet to the brain. The bullet in question is fired by the dapper gangster Benny, voiced by the late Matthew Perry, in an opening sequence that sees the Courier robbed of his quarry, the platinum chip, and dumped into a shallow grave. Naturally, the story doesn't end there, or else New Vegas would be a very short game. Rescued by a robot called Securian Victor, and then nursed back to health by a lovable old lad by the name of Doc Mitchell, the Courier is all patched up and unleashed to the Mojave Desert, and from there, the main quest of Fallout, New Vegas, kicks in. And at its core, it's relatively simple. Locate and kill Benny, and retrieve the platinum chip. While the Courier's quest for revenge against Benny may be as simple on the surface, it unravels into something a lot more complicated. For starters, Benny's looking to use the platinum chip to take New Vegas for himself, right from under the watchful eyes of his boss, Mr. House. You see, the platinum chip, a pre-war invention, contains an all-important upgrade program that was originally designed to help protect Vegas, but in the wrong hands, could completely change the balance of power in the city. And this is where the storytelling of Fallout New Vegas falls into the hands of the player, as there are 4 different endings available on what factions you plead your allegiance to. It all boils down to a great big bloody battle of the Hoover Dam, with the Courier on the attacking side of the Caesar's Legion, on the defensive side with the NCR, as part of the sneaky beaky infiltration with Mr. House, or lastly taking Benny's mission and claiming New Vegas as an independent territory. Depending on your actions, you get a neat little slideshow of your impacts across New Vegas and the Mojave Desert. In Fallout 4, it's finally time to catch up with our old friend, the Sole Survivor, who we last saw over 2 centuries ago, when they were cryogenically frozen with Vault 111. It's not a happy reunion for our nuclear family. At some point, the old survivors awoken from their cryogenic slumber. They witnessed the murder of their spouse and the abduction of their infant son, Sean, to boot. And so the main quest of Fallout 4 kicks off, which in similar vein to Fallout 3, is all about the rescue of a family member. Couple this with the Fallout TV show, we are starting to see something of a trope develop. Anyways, the sole survivor ventures off into the Commonwealth, the irradiated wastes of the city of Boston and its surroundings, and experiences something of a Fallout's greatest hits mixtape with all in the first hour of the game. After this breathless intro, the sole survivor makes his way to the Diamond City, a township located within the remains of Fenway Park, the old baseball stadium of the Boston Red Sox. And it's here that they start hearing about the whisperings of Fallout 4's big bad. No, not the lad who kidnapped Sean, a secretive organization that goes by the name of the Institute. The rumors that surround the Institute talk about a terrorist group of sorts who go around the Commonwealth, kidnapping ordinary folk and replacing them with synths, basically human-like synthetic robots. The sole survivor gets caught up in the machinations of the Institute when they finally locate their son's kidnapper, a lad named Conrad Kellogg. Kellogg is a means to an end though, as he reveals that Sean is now in possession of the Institute, which means the sole survivor will have to venture into the belly of the beast. Only that's easier said than done, as the sole survivor soon finds out. They discover that the only way into the Institute is via teleportation. In order to build a working teleporter, they have to ally themselves with one of the game's 3 anti-Institute factions. For starters, there's the Minutemen, the faction that they beat in the intro, who are styled after American Revolutionary War soldiers. There's the iconic Brotherhood of Steel, who have a giant airship hovering around the skies of the Commonwealth. Lastly, there's the Railroad, a group who are based on the Underground Railroad, who seek to save and rehabilitate synths from the Institute. Naturally, you can ally yourself with any one of them en route to entering the Institute, which all leads you to the shocking revelation of whose game Big Bad is. Sean. And so we're at that moment in a Fallout game where the story choices fall back on the player, and this one is a bit out there. Sean invites the sole survivor to become his successor after his death, and if you accept this enticing offer, your son reveals to you that he's not long for this world and he has cancer. But if you refuse Sean's offer, things get a little more explosive. The sole survivor hightails it back to their faction of choice to devise a plan to destroy the Institute, which eventually leads to them blowing up their son's evil organization by detonating a nuclear reactor, which brings the main campaign of Fallout 4 to a close. The Fallout video game series is a post-apocalyptic masterpiece, renowned for its immersive world building, rich storytelling, and deep role-playing elements. Set in alternate timelines divergent from our own history, Fallout thrusts players into a world ravaged by nuclear war, where surviving factions vie for power and resources amidst the ruins. The series is celebrated for its dark humor, retro-futuristic aesthetic, and moral ambiguity, allowing players to navigate complex choices with far-reaching consequences, from the iconic vaults of the earliest games to the sprawling wastelands of later installments. Fallout captivates us with its blend of exploration, combat, and decision-making. Despite occasional missteps, the series endures as a testament to the enduring appeal of post-apocalyptic fiction in gaming.
Baba Booey. What the dog doing? Boner.